Good afternoon. I think it's again preaching to the choir, and when I look out at this body and think how many people have been involved in so much of the work of Laudato Si and the Appalachian Pastoral Letters, which have emphasized the environment, what we're trying to do in Lexington is building on all of those things already. I'm happy that it's being put together in the way that it is, and I'm very happy to have Joshua Van Cleef working in our Peace and Justice office, and he's really doing the heavy lifting when it comes to this Laudato Si plan. In addition to him, there's a Laudato Si commission in the diocese, and there's been lots of work going on even before the plan was in place. So I'm going to put some context to this. I'm going to ask Josh to talk specifically about the plan, and then we'll certainly have opportunities for questions. When we try to apply that specifically to Appalachia, there's some interesting things I think we should be paying attention to, and if time allows, we'll get a little bit more, go backwards into the Project 2025 approach, because it really addresses these things head on in a negative way. So it was a couple of weeks ago I was asked by a young adults group online that meets monthly. They're part of the Catholic Climate Covenant group, and they wanted to have a conversation with the bishop about how do we get other bishops to do what you're doing. Okay? I don't have easy answers to that question, but I did help to reflect with them on the role of the bishop, and I think it might be relevant here as well. You know, canon law and the church's tradition talks about three munera, M-U-N-E-R-A, or the three directives or commands or charges or responsibilities of the bishop, which are to teach, to sanctify, and to govern. We don't have a lot of governing authority, but we do try to lead and have to establish policies and things like that. And thinking about each of those three munera, teaching and sanctifying and governing, the common feature is that of leadership. It's leading. And then as I think about the role of leadership, I'm reminded how Pope Francis said rather early in his pontificate that there are more than one ways of leading, and a good shepherd, a good bishop, a good pastor, shepherd being the same word in Latin, knows when to lead in a particular way. So there's a time when it's important to be leading in front, and that seems to be when nobody else is moving or wants to go in that direction. And there was a little bit of back and forth between Josh and myself about the timing of this plan. I'm waiting for the right time. He's saying the right time is past. Let's get going. And so we had to move forward, even though I wasn't sure anybody was behind me. So sometimes leading is out in front. Sometimes leading is from behind. And so if I'm not sure anybody's behind me, then I have to go to where they are and start pushing in that direction. So that's the second kind of leadership that a shepherd has to do, get the sheep moving in the right direction. And the third one, which is probably my favorite one, is when you lead in the midst of the sheep. When you can be doing what they're doing, when we're all going in the same direction more or less, you keep your eye on those who are getting in danger or straying, but we're moving together. And that was the hope, the goal of the way that this plan was designed and put out, that all the parishes would be together, maybe at different places. There are certainly more than a few stragglers. There are some way out ahead of the rest of us, thank God. Parishes that are rather small and certainly in poor settings where they already have solar panels, where they're already converted to renewable energy, where they've already reduced their carbon use considerably, and where people have the mindset of living in relationship, in right relationship with the environment and with other people. So we have to hold up those models. We have to walk with those who are taking their time about getting there, and then nudge and encourage, eventually threaten those who are dragging too far behind, or just at least remind them of the responsibility and how this is essential to the faith. I think one of the big problems in the church in the United States, well, there are a number of those problems, One of them is a lack of confidence and a lack of trust on the part of the U.S. bishops. Maybe I shouldn't say trust. The U.S. bishops don't like Pope Francis. So there's not a lot of energy and enthusiasm around his priorities. And I hate to say that, it pains me to say that, but it's the reality. So that makes it rather difficult in some places where their obstinacy, where the leadership is obstinately opposed to the direction of Pope Francis. That makes it quite hard, and it was something I heard a little bit from the young people on that Zoom call about. Another challenge is that for a long time in the United States, and I don't think we're unique in this, we considered, the majority of us, certainly not CCA, but the majority of the church considers Catholic social teaching to be kind of a specialization. It's kind of a fringe interest. It's what you do if you don't have anything better to do, but the real work is about catechesis and liturgy and the stuff that goes on inside the church. And I think one of the great challenges that this first pope from Latin America, this first pope from the global south, has taught us is by bringing all of the experience of the Latin American church to the center of the church. He's brought the periphery to the center, and he's tried to make peripheral teachings central teachings to the faith. In other words, there's no living the gospel without living Catholic social teaching. And if we think we can promote the gospel and the way of life, we may be promoting the church and the church's interest, but we're not about the gospel unless we have that central piece. And we recognize now, but Francis is far from the first pope to recognize the need for a conversion about our use of natural resources and our relationship with nature. In the United States, we were pretty much shielded from the idea that Benedict XVI in Europe was called the Green Pope. And Benedict XVI was the one who installed solar panels in the Vatican. And many of these things were underway before Francis even got there. And he was already taking it seriously. John Paul II had opined about the role of humanity in global change, global crisis, global climate change, however it was worded, that wording has evolved over the years. But this is not new, but boy, when Francis says it, it gets a reaction. Because Francis is saying this is not just optional stuff. You know, it's not the Thursday night novena that, you know, it's not an obligation and you show up if you want to. It's part and parcel of what it is. So the three munera can all be related to Laudato Si and to having a pastoral approach on Laudato Si, leading, sanctifying by teaching how all of the teachings from Laudato Si are related to our spirituality. And I'm grateful that Laudato Si group, committee, commission in our diocese was busy about that, trying to connect liturgical events, trying to connect the season of creation, trying to connect prayer services, a ritual around planting trees, a ritual around the cycles of nature, to bring that into our schools and parishes with a sense that this is part of what we do. So the teaching, this is the doctrine of the church, the sanctifying, it connects to the liturgical year, and of course the administration, that means you got to put your money where your mouth is. And that's been a challenge for much of the church. We're not unique in having an addiction to fossil fuels in many of the dioceses. We're not unique in that, and we're not unique in having a hard time weaning ourselves off of that. So part of what we have to do is look at our portfolios and look at how we are supporting the works of the church and where there are investments that are being tied up into the continued development of fossil fuels. Among other things, we're not allowed to invest in armaments and production of nuclear weapons. We're not allowed to invest in abortifacients and a lot of things that would be problematic in the medical field. We shouldn't be investing in stuff that is destructive to the environment. It's a little bit harder to get into the areas where you're proactive in terms of how you use your investments. The religious women, not surprising, are in the lead on that, and many of their communities have taken their place at annual meetings of shareholders and used their platform when they can to bring about effective change in how a company or a fund is being invested. So trying to do all of that, seeing this as a holistic approach. I've said to a couple of you informally, and I think it's going to be very important to consider as we try to promote once again the pastorals, the Appalachian pastorals, the 50th year of the first one coming up, that the pastorals came out of the context of the Second Vatican Council. And when so much of the church has thought that we have moved on from the Second Vatican Council, or that was already done a long time ago, and when you realize that there has been an agenda to go backwards in so many areas, we have to look at what has been lost as well as what has been gained since the time of the Second Vatican Council. And it's no longer Father from the pulpit saying this is what has to do. That's still important, but it doesn't work all by itself. It's about having collaboration. It's about a flourishing of lay ministry. It's about connecting what we believe about the care of the earth to our Bible study, to our ecumenical dialogue, to our social justice work, to everything else that we do. And the no-brainer that should be evident to everybody in any diocese anywhere in the world is that young people are interested in this topic, and they're motivated by this topic, and they're concerned enough to do something about it. And one of our most effective, did Sister Kathleen disappear on us? One of our most, oh, she's back there. Okay, one of our most effective events so far has been the tree planting. You know, the day that we had young people from the Newman Center and from high schools planting 200 some trees in a couple of hours. You know, those are the things that really work. They're educational opportunities. We celebrated a Mass outdoors in the context of doing that and reflected on what's happening to our world, to our diocese. So Vatican II taught us that the church is not apart from history. The church exists in time and space. The church in heaven won't be needed. The church on earth is important because it's the guide, it's the direction, it provides the path to the fullness of life. The church in history is immersed in the world. And so, hand in hand with our late to the table belief as Catholics that separation of church and state can work, and did actually work well in the United States, where people voluntarily support churches, where the government's not supposed to get involved and tell churches what to do, nor hinder the free exercise of religion. In our case, that means we have a responsibility to advocate publicly for positions. It's not the same as coerce people into voting. It's not the same as condemn people who don't think the same way. It's that we should have a voice advocating and arguing in the public square for what we believe contributes to the common good for believers and non-believers alike. And this area certainly qualifies in that. It was Vatican II that taught us about being immersed in the world and the importance of that, as well as the importance of context. Now, the Lexington Diocese is a relatively new diocese. I'm the third bishop of the diocese. The other two are still living, are retired. My predecessors was founded as recently as 1988, the same year as the Diocese of Knoxville in Tennessee. And it was formed largely because the Appalachian portion of the diocese was so far from Covington, which was the mother see beforehand. Some of our counties came from Louisville. The vast majority of the diocese came from Covington. Covington was a long way from Jenny Wiley State Park or from Pikeville or from many of the places around here. 30-some years later, Lexington's a long way from Jenny Wiley, and the people that live here still feel disconnected from the urban center or the center of the diocese because the realities are different. So we've tried to embrace the reality that we have the bluegrass part of the diocese, we have the Appalachian portion of the diocese, but it's one church. And then throughout the bluegrass and the Appalachian portion of the diocese, we have the migrant and refugee community that are in both parts and are another factor that has to be taken seriously in our pastoral planning and our pastoral work. And as we know in this committee very well, Appalachia has its own history and relationship with Catholicism. Catholicism came into this area as a foreign reality with miners and immigrants from Eastern and Southern Europe who not only brought their languages, their strange food, their customs, their music, they also brought their religion with them. In addition to having all of the ethnic components of the religion, masses were celebrated in a foreign language, foreign even to those who brought it. It was celebrated in Latin at the time. So it didn't look very American to the people already living in this part of the world. And it was strange. And we had other churches teaching people that priests had tails under their vestments and nuns had horns under their veils, and all kinds of anti-Catholic prejudices grew up, mostly out of ignorance or the lack of relationship or knowing anybody who was part of that faith community. But it was the beginning when the pastoral letters, now the sisters had been here long before the pastoral letters came out. Sisters from Covington, 3 religious orders of women that had their mother houses in Covington, were told by one of the bishops of Covington, if you want to remain in the diocese, start a hospital in Appalachia. One of them included the Sisters of Notre Dame, who are teaching order, had nothing to do with hospitals. Another were Benedictines, but they did it. And they provided services and care and schools in all of these places. And through their work and their example, through their ministries and their outreach, prejudice against Catholicism, at least in our part of Appalachia, really diminished considerably. It's not gone, it's not overcome, but it really diminished seriously because of the good witness and example of the sisters, and lately followed by lay missionaries. A more common thing that I hear regularly in the Appalachian portion of our diocese is that, well, those Catholics may not be Christian, but they sure act like it. And as I like to say, on Judgment Day, I'll take it, right? Because Jesus said, you'll be judged on whether you fed the hungry and clothed the naked and sheltered the homeless, etc. So if we act like it, we're probably on the right track. So there has been significant advances. It doesn't mean things are completely good, although when our last 2 Tiffin Franciscan sisters, after one of them spent more than 40 years working in the diocese, and when the 2 of them decided it was time to go back to the mother house, and that was the end of the ministry that had been performed by many Tiffin Franciscans in this diocese over decades. When they went back, they had a farewell celebration when an official from the county and the mayor and all these other public figures were there. But the head, one of the Baptist pastors who also has a role in government, said that the sisters were what held the ministerial association together. Now, the history I heard was that women weren't allowed in ministerial associations, first of all, and then when some women were ordained in some churches, well, sisters weren't ordained, so they weren't part of it. In some places, Catholics weren't allowed in the ministerial associations. And here in Boonville, Kentucky, they're saying without the sisters, there would have been no ministerial association. So I had to say, I have to relearn what I thought I knew about this part of the diocese. But it's true, these things evolve. But many groups of sisters came after the first of the pastoral letters. That's when knowledge about Appalachia became far and wide, and there was an attraction. Look at the way those letters are written. Look at the free verse that is used in those letters. Look at the way the church is portrayed. I was a student in Berkeley when I first became aware of these letters and thought, wow, I've never seen a church document like that. And I shared it with everybody I could come across. Until Pope Francis, who kind of writes in the same style, but until then, we never had church documents that read in quite such an accessible way. So that brought many of the sisters to work in Appalachia and also contributed to a change in attitude towards Catholics. All of that makes it possible to do what we're trying to do now because of a connection with the people. If we were still a foreign entity that was there and a closed community that only took care of its own, it would be very hard to preach Laudato Si in this part of the world, and we wouldn't have much credibility and people wouldn't have much reason to pay attention to us. But it's because of the outreach, it's because of the investment, it's because of the great work that Josh Van Cleef did with so much help during the flooding that affected so much of this region a couple of years ago, and got Catholics involved with other denominations and secular agencies that were working throughout these counties that we really were recognized, and wasn't doing it for recognition, but we were seen as part of the community, which is all, I think, very vital and important to having the credibility to say what we do. We know that from the days of the extractive industry of timber, which was very strong in this region, then coal, that so much of the capital that was earned from the resources of this area went outside of this area instead of being invested in this area. And we've been with the people through all of that and recognize all of that. We've been with people through the boom and bust economies and have sometimes better, sometimes worse, have been better or worse at it, but have denounced the profiteers who take money and go elsewhere. We know that jobs are critical in this region, and of course it's threatening to hear that we want to shut down the coal plants. Of course, that is a very harsh reality for people to hear. We also know that the population is declining in most of these counties, is aging in most of these counties. There's the proverbial brain drain, that people have to go outside if they're educated to get work somewhere else, and the bad patterns of addiction, which also can be connected to the coal industry when painkillers become addictive, etc. So we have a suffering population at large. In the third pastoral, or the People's Pastoral, when they quoted Wendell Berry about places preaching hope, preaching resurrection in places of crucifixion, I think the church has some credibility because we have been in those places and remain in those places of crucifixion. So we had this 1975 letter, the 1995 letter, and at first, I came in 2015, which would have been time for another letter. And everybody I talked to said there's no way in the world that the bishops would get together and write this letter. I had no idea that CCA was writing a letter. But the message I got was there was no way that that could happen from the bishops of the region in 2015. 2015 is when Laudato Si was released. And so for me, 2015, there's our pastoral letter for Appalachia. Now it's on a global scale. And shortly after that, when I had the opportunity to be with the new bishops who met with Pope Francis, I told them about this letter, and I told them about how Appalachia was implementing Laudato Si in a particular way in the challenges and the reality of Appalachia. The People's Pastoral also picked up on some of the language that is very dear to Pope Francis when it talks about magisterium of the poor and magisterium of the earth. That when we pay attention to the earth and when we pay attention to the poor, these are valid sources for how God communicates with us. These are valid sources for how the Spirit is working in the world and instructing us. So in Laudato Si, we have Pope Francis using some pretty blunt language about the condition of the planet. In one place, a pile of filth. But in other places, he talks magnificently and poetically about the beauty of the earth. And I think it's essential that we see both dimensions of that. And I think it's essential, and I think the Appalachian pastoral letters capture that, with the beauty of the environment, the attempts to overcome poverty with sustainable programs, and as the final, or the most recent of the letter says, with Appalachians telling their own story. The whole country tells the story about Appalachia. Usually it's a story of backwardness, of ignoring people, or that it doesn't matter. It's more than just the flyover that the East and West Coast consider most of the country, but it's considered particularly backward and stubborn and stuck in the past. The pastoral letters call out a beauty there. And if we can build on all of that when we try to implement Laudato Si, in the same way that the synodal process going on in the church right now is supposed to be an ongoing dialogue with the universal church headquartered in Rome and the local churches, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Well, Rome has found some pretty unwilling partners in much of the United States, but the rest of the world is taking this on. And some of our places are having the synodal process. Well, I think Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti, the other great encyclical of Pope Francis, work that way as well. We have to take what's being said there, apply them here, share the experience that we have here back with Rome so that they are continuously nurturing each other. So when I think about the Laudato Si goals, which have been established for the church overall, and dioceses and bishops are called upon to sign on to these Laudato Si goals, I think we were already busy doing this, both as the CCA and in the Diocese of Lexington. And I think one of Josh's great ideas in the architecture of the Laudato Si plan for the Diocese of Lexington is build on what's already happening. We are not starting from scratch. It's not a beginning from nothing. When one of the Laudato Si goals is to respond to the cry of the earth, I can only think of John Rausch bringing people around on the mountaintop tour, mountaintop removal tours, or conducting Stations of the Cross of the mountains. I'm sure some of you participated in those events. And the advocacy for reclamation of lands, and talking about the loss of connection to the earth, looking at generations that used to farm, and now who can farm, who even knows how to farm, who even has the capacity to farm in a different kind of environment, a different kind of economy, a different moment in history. How do we reconnect to the earth? A response to the cry of the poor, featured in all of the pastoral letters, but especially in the one that Michael Iafrate and those who helped him write this talked about, with advocacy for, again, for reclamation, but emphasizing that magisterium of the earth and magisterium of the poor. The third point is ecological economics. Pope Francis constantly says that in the tradition of John Paul II, that the economy has to serve people and not the other way around. We know that's not the way it works in the so-called real world, but that's what we have to advocate for. And ecological economics means we have to take seriously. How can you ask people who've lost their livelihood to be advocating to save the planet? It's like going to the African American Commission and telling them to solve racism. It sounds like a logical thing until you think about it. Right? But that ecological economics is also featured in the pastoral letters, where they talked about creating co-ops. They talked about the church creating places for reflection and thought about how to affect the environment. They talked about sustainable production instead of the boom and bust economies. And where do we find ourselves here at Jenny Wiley? Right off of US 23, the country music highway, but more popularly known as the Hillbilly Highway, because it went right to Detroit, where the jobs were in the auto industry when coal was not active. So we have this symbol of the economy right here next to us. The fourth point was the adaptation of sustainable lifestyles. And Father Bob DeWicki, an Augustinian priest who's been working and resides in our diocese and has been working in our diocese, came to us from a stint at the United Nations where he was working on sustainable goals. So he comes ready to teach and preach all about the sustainable goals that the United Nations has put forth, is working around the whole world, and he's been eager to help us put things into practice in our diocese. But it addresses the issues of waste and recycling, of dietary habits that most of us don't want to talk about food deserts that our local communities here know quite a bit about public transportation, and the reduction of single-use plastics. And that reduction of single-use plastics has caused a bit of consternation in our chancery, but this is a time where it was lead in front, and we're just going to mandate that we're not going to do this stuff anymore. And yeah, we're going to have to spend more time washing dishes. And yes, we're going to have to pay a little bit more to get biodegradable materials, but either we believe this or not. And if we say that we believe it, then we have to put it into action. Ecological education was the fifth of those. And so we have to make sure that there's a component in our schools. How can we have Catholic schools that are not teaching the principles of Laudato Si? Well, thanks to our Laudato Si Commission, they're doing a little bit better at that, and we know that hands-on experience is much better of a teacher than another lesson added to an already overloaded curriculum. We have to integrate it into religious formation, not just as a surplus or extra thing that we do, but as integral to our lives of faith, because we believe in Jesus Christ, because we believe in our redemption, because we believe that God made heaven and earth, because we believe these things, and we have a responsibility to care for the earth. Again, the work of the Laudato Si Commission is very important. The Appalachian immersion experiences that happen at Mount Tabor Monastery are very important. All these hands-on opportunities to put the teachings of Laudato Si and the teachings of our own pastoral letters into practice. As I've already mentioned, there's an ecological spirituality. So connecting the liturgy and preaching. And that comes kind of naturally to me as a Franciscan, because Francis of Assisi, the patron of the ecology 800 years ago, before we're anywhere near the current reality, also recognized that we can't talk about care for creation apart from care from human beings. This is one big system that has to work together. It's an integral system. And so to promote a spirituality that takes that into account, to look out through the windows here, we have a beautiful setting for meditation, for liturgy, for prayer, for movement. I talk about driving from Lexington down to this part of the diocese, which happens frequently on a Sunday morning, when I get to see the mist rising up through the valleys, and it's just spectacular. I have this mini retreat on the way to church just because of the majestic beauty that's around us. But reinforces the responsibility to care for it and make sure it's available for future generations to enjoy. The final of those goals is about, the Laudato Si goals is about community resilience and empowerment. And that's where I think our diocesan plan comes into place, where we have to have a structured and orderly way to make sure that we're actually doing something and not just talking about it. Because we could be very good at talking about what we're supposed to do. We get very good at talking about the Eucharist. We've talked the Eucharist quite a bit in this Eucharistic year, but when does it come time to live that spirituality of self-gift and laying down one's life and belief in transformation and the Paschal mystery that underlies the Eucharist? How do we put this Laudato Si into practice? So Josh, you want to bring us in here? He was put on the spot, but he knows this inside and out.
So yeah, I'm happy to speak to this plan. It would be first, as helpful to say something about structuring and why structuring is important, especially in the face of a crisis. And the reality is this is a crisis. This is an ecological crisis. Pope Francis, in a recent 60-minute interview, said, in regard to climate change, we are on a road to death. So I have a 3-year-old, Joy, and a 2-year-old, Emmanuel. And if I think where I want to be in 2050, I hope to have grandkids. Statistics that came out from the Vatican say that if we don't make a change, we will need 3 planets to support us by 2050. We don't have 3 planets. So this is a crisis. What is that world going to look like for my grandchildren? So I think it's helpful to imagine then, as I think back about the flood recovery, which was a crisis, think about how we responded. We put a team together who could make decisions. On that team, I was on that team, Father Dan Knoll, our vicar, was on that team, Doug Culp was on that team, the sisters were on that team. We put a process in place so we could be accountable to the people in the 13 counties that were affected. And we wanted measurable results. So too, I think as we think about Laudato Si and the ecological crisis, it's time to think about the process. Do we have a process that's suitable for the crisis? So for our diocesan process, it really kicked off on May 19th, on Pentecost. And all parishes in our diocese received a letter from Bishop John that said we are going to now start this process. The Laudato Si Action Platform, if you all are familiar with it, it lays out those 7 goals that Bishop John just mentioned and is the way for all dioceses and parishes and families and institutions in the Catholic Church to build out real, manageable, and measurable plans. So the diocesan plan is that as a diocese, we're taking on some goals. So net zero by 2030 for scope 2 emissions. That's one part of what we're doing. There are other things we're looking at for that too, that the diocese as a whole can do. But then rather than putting together a Laudato Si action plan that gave a lot of advice to parishes or recommendations, we determined that rather our plan as a diocese would include the plan of every single parish. So that's the road we began May 19th. All of the parishes then enrolled in the Laudato Si action platform. This way, the entire global church can track us and see what we're doing. All of the parishes were then asked to make a team. Their pastor or parish life director and at least 2 other people. Because we know if you're going to be serious about responding to a crisis, you have to put a team together that can make those decisions. So we asked all parishes to make a team. And then all of our parishes began doing a parish assessment based on the 7 goals of Laudato Si. As Bishop mentioned, the first thing parishes are asked to do is to name how they're already doing those goals. So all of our parishes are already responding to the cry of the earth in some way. All of our parishes are already responding to the cry of the poor. Many of our parishes are doing a really great job there with their outreach programs. A lot of our parishes have already began doing things around recycling, sustainable lifestyle, or choosing to purchase goods that are fair trade. Our parishes are already doing something around St. Francis Day, October 4th, doing a pet blessing, or maybe having some part of Laudato Si in their education. And then community resilience and empowerment. Many of our parishes are going to Catholics at the Capitol, or involved with Build, or some other community organization. So we asked all of our parishes to first name what they're already doing, and then name concrete steps they can take in all 7 of those goals.
But I'd never see any traction with this, and we're using bamboo eating utensils that are biodegradable. I was just amazed that it is catching, and sometimes people come at it from different ways and different ways. But I think the genius was the parish buy-in, because it's not telling you here's more things to put on your plate, but let's start with what you're doing and how do you up the game? How do you enhance that? How do you go and build on that and do something better? And it was through a process of listening, not just telling people what to do. Here's what needs to be done, but how can you do this best? And in a diocese that includes the Bluegrass area and the Appalachian portion of the diocese, I've learned from day one, there is no one-size-fits-all that works in the diocese. So we have to be flexible and have to be adaptable in the ways things are going on. I'd also like to talk about the implementation of that plan and the net zero commitment as another example for myself of the 3 approaches to leadership. Again, leading from in front. I don't think if I ever waited for people to say, yeah, let's get on board and sign this. There was action in the Presbyteral Council. It got voted down. I don't know how many times. Well, it's too controversial. What will the coal people say? Blah, blah, blah. So I just said, this is a teaching of the church. We're in the heart of an area that has to respond to it. We're just going to have to take the risk. I'm just going to have to take the risk and step out there. So we need to meet in front. But in the middle, because we found out lots of people are already committed to this, even industry and other places that we expect to be harder to convince. So, through this net zero problem, we have leadership from the Toyota plant, one of the major manufacturers in the diocese, on the team, from Alltech, another major industry, Lexmark, Appalachian Regional Healthcare, Solar Energy Solutions for obvious reason, Edenlyn Renewables, and then from our own, not only Justice and Peace, because that can allow it to be, not that you're on the fringe, but it can be marginalized if we don't have finance in the middle of that and property in the middle of that. So all of those areas come together. And we are learning that we can move from partisan issues that are so divisive to having an impact, which does bring people together. So you won't find too many people with Harris and Walt signs in their yards in Boonville, but you will find lots of pride that they have solar panels on their church and that their energy bills are $7 a month. They have lots of pride in that, right? So you can have an impact that moves us beyond the partisan thing. I think the biggest issue, are we out of time, sister?
No, I have a question.
Good. I would say, I think that the biggest challenge remains overcoming the inertia. You know, it's getting started. How much of life is about getting started, taking the first step? I think Sister Kathleen's going to move us into the question portion, which is good.
I just wanted to say that the commission has also heard from the Diocese of Louisville, Knoxville, and I think there's another one that have heard about what's happening here in the Diocese of Lexington. So we have included them and are trying to help them. But like it has been said, their bishops aren't moving, so they want to know how to get started. The only other thing I was going to say is our plan available for people to look at so they don't have to start from scratch one?
It's on the website.
It's on our website.
cdlex.org, Catholic Diocese of Lexington, cdlex.org.
The Laudato plan is online. You just,
The action plan, yes.
action plan, you just go to the Laudato Si action plan.
Yes,
That's all you have to put in your computer and it'll pop up.
yes.
Yeah.
That's the global one. She was
That's the
asking about
global one,
diocesan
right,
plan.
yeah.
Thank you, Bishop John and Josh. Polly Duncan Collum with Glen Mary Home Missioners, Josh's predecessor in the Diocese of Lexington. And we work with parishes in the rural South. So I have two very concrete questions. One is, did you encourage or was there any overflow, kind of inspirational overflow for parishioners to take a look at their lives as family members, their carbon footprint as family members? Has that happened just because it happened, or did you encourage families to take a look at that? That's A. And then very pragmatically, Josh, what was most helpful for you in terms of resources? Laudato Si Action Plan or Catholic Climate Covenant, or is there another source where you can, for instance, you mentioned biodegradable water containers and eating implements. Like, when people come to you, where's your go-to place, or did you just pull different things for parishes?
Sure. Well, I think one really helpful place is God's Planet. You know, there's a website, God's Planet, which looks at all of the plans that have come out of parishes and dioceses in the United States, all the Laudato Si action plans. You can get that at Laudato Si Action Platform as well. So what I work very closely with Catholic Climate Covenant and with Laudato Si Movement. You know, I think finding out what other parishes have done and dioceses have done, that was really helpful to see what are some low-hanging fruit that people can do. Also, the commission has come up with lists of things that all of our parishes can do. And I think hearing from the parishes, there are a lot of really passionate people. So as I hear from those folks, I'm able to kind of share that information. But I would say Catholic Climate Covenant has been an incredible partner in this. So I would always turn to them, and especially around creating plans.
And I would add to that our commission has put together a resource list. So if anybody would like to have that, just get in touch with me. You know, you've got my emails on the list there of everybody. So we do have that. And this goes back to what we talked about earlier about listening to people. That's what's happening in our small parish. Our small parish suffered greatly because of its leadership, but the people are passionate. So we've been having, like Josh was saying, the listening session, and we've been working on this. We don't have parish council meetings, we have parish assemblies, and the people, their voice is being heard. That's where it has to come from. And we're finding that our parish is starting to rebuild. And we're grateful for the Spirit's movement in all of this. Yes.
You want to?
So we have encouraged that at the local level for parishes to for all of the parishioners to get involved, and we have not done much programming in terms of asking individual parishioners to do stuff, but we've worked with all of the pastors. So I went to every deanery meeting and had listening and said, you know, this is what we're going to do. Tell me what you think. and heard that feedback, and I've encouraged those pastors and those teams to kind of open that up for their parishioners. But we have not made as part of our plan that individual families would do something and get back to us, but they certainly can. As part of the Laudato Si action platform, individual families can also make plans.
And if I'm not mistaken, some of them have included that in their plans. The
That's
parishes have reported those things.
That's
that-
right. So some of our
That
parishes
there are
have-
families doing particular things.
And I meant to do that, Polly. I meant to answer that question too. But yes, I agree with what they've been saying. But again, what's happening in our parish is people saying, well, where do we take the recyclables? How do we do this? Our family needs to, so it will happen because, it's coming, it's just like if the parent doesn't show it, it's not going to happen. But if the parent is showing how you're supposed to live a good life, then the kids are going to pick it up. Not that we're kids, because, we're all pretty old, so, yeah.
Let me mention one other thing that's a kind of a leadership part that's really important is this was already in our pastoral plan for the diocese that we would be taking on Laudato Si very seriously and the season of creation. So when was the plan released?
2018.
2018. So already, parishes and deaneries, they already knew that part of stewardship was going to be that we have to look at our resources and how we're taking care of the earth. So when this plan came out, the way I was able to express it too with pastors was this isn't something new. This is something we are concretizing our commitments and coordinating our efforts across the diocese. But that's another place of leadership is when it's in the pastoral plan, you have a good starting point.
Okay, I was just wondering, when we talk about families and how to implement things in families, I don't believe everything I see on TV and advertisements. And so a simple thing like, have you heard anybody that uses like the Earth Breeze or the Arm & Hammer biodegradable sheets for laundries? I'm not in the mood to buy something and find out it's tearing up my washing machine. But it promotes itself by saying you no longer have a big plastic container that's mostly water. Have you heard anything about that? Things that the diocese might be able to provide a list of, these are the kinds of things you can use rather than a lot of the plastics.
Well, because we've wanted to keep this process really simple, as pastors or teams reach out, then we're able to give that feedback. I would say your best resource would be the commission, the Laudato Si Commission. They've really developed a lot of those resources for helping people use their purchase power to make some sustainable choices.
If I could just add to that I think it's supposed to happen in October. I really hope it happens a little bit later. But the commission is going to be, there are going to be some helps for these parish teams if they need them. We're going to be starting that from what I understand from Josh. So we're going to be, hey, there's these resources, or you could try this and you could try that. And yes, say you have all the parishes in Lexington, can they buy their in bulk, these kinds of things, right, or whatever.
And some, maybe we could get feedback from places that have tried stuff that doesn't work and share that information as well. That's a very good suggestion. And I wanted to go back to another portion of what Polly was saying before. When we talk about carbon footprint, that can be a valuable thing, but the origins of the carbon footprint concept? It came from the extractive industries. It came from coal and oil trying to shift corporate responsibility onto individuals. So if you can donate miles from your airplane trips and everything else and feel good about doing something for the environment, it's taking the onus off of them to do things. So it is good to calculate how much am I contributing to the problem. That's a valuable thing. But it's naive to think that individuals alone can resolve this.
Bishop, this is a little bit off of Laudato Si, but I wonder if you'd comment on what happened at the USCCB when they let go so many people out of the peace and justice offices. And where are we going with that as a national group?
I'm on that subcommittee and I have no idea. I'm on the CCHE subcommittee. So there was a closed session at the spring meeting, the June meeting of the USCCB, and we got wind of this idea. Those of us on the subcommittee got wind of this idea that the CCHD, the Catholic Campaign for Human Development, so that's the funding that comes from an annual collection in November every year. It nicely coincides with the World Sunday of the Poor that Pope Francis has inaugurated, and it is specifically for programs that help the poor populations to become their own protagonists, to have a say in how they're pulled up out of poverty. It's not pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, but be part of a coalition that's doing something. So it supports community organizing, it supports economic incentives, it supports small business engines, things like that, that are serving an at-risk population and have people from that population on their boards. Well, a good portion of the bishops do not understand that. And so they are, I mean, I hesitate to say what I have to say sometimes, but it was just shocking that we could be in a room and a bishop actually said, this was in closed session, so I'm not supposed to repeat it, well, you haven't solved poverty yet. Don't you think this is ineffective? Yeah, well, that's what I said. You know, we haven't resolved sin, so maybe the church is ineffective, but you know, just absurd. But this was what's going on. So the majority of the bishops that spoke at that time were strongly in favor. Was pleasantly surprised. Now, I did a little background and called every Catholic journalist I know to put something in the press, so they were hearing from their parishioners, and they were hearing from groups that were funded by CCHD in their diocese, and they were hearing quite a bit. And I'm very grateful to a good portion of the Catholic press that drew attention to this. Otherwise, it would have been behind closed doors. So there was a strong support, very strong support. The only alternative was presented by a couple of bishops who said all the money from that collection should go to Catholic schools because Catholic schools are the best program that we have for reducing poverty. Not only that, but then afterwards, as soon as the vast majority were in favor of continuing CCHD, several, including the new Bishop of Charlotte, spoke up and saying we need to do more in this area. And after that, since they didn't get the support for ending the program, they cut the staff. So it's another way to control. Father Pat?
I'm curious. I love what you all are doing. Are there people from any other dioceses where this kind of planned action is going on in the Appalachian region?
Oh, in Appalachia. San Diego for sure, but that's far from Appalachia.
Louisville, I mean, Indianapolis, not Louisville, Indianapolis
Louisville is doing, they do have a creation care team, just to be honest, and it has a place within the diocesan structure, so.
We had talked to somebody from them, and they were gonna try to move forward, yes. And like Bishop said, a lot of the other countries are far ahead of us. So, yeah, it is catching, and of course, the United States, we're so set in our ways of life that, people don't want to give this up or change this or change that, so, yeah.
And that's one of the reasons, Sister Kathleen, that's why Pope Francis repeatedly says, technology alone won't do it. It's a combination. We need to have better technology and more efficient use of energy. That alone won't do it. Conversion by itself won't do it. It's also got to be government investment and industry investment in making the cuts and a change of lifestyle. And that's the part we haven't gotten to yet. What was the most controversial part of what we proposed? Less meat. Even at the Chancery, that we would not, at the Chancery said, okay, the Chancery meal celebrations, there won't be any meat. What about the cattle industry? I learn a lot of things that I say from from those sources. But yes, that was the hardest one.
I'm wondering if before or during this process, any conversations around climate grief?
Climate grief, did you say?
Yeah, I mean, that's a phenomenon, especially among the young. I'm just wondering how that.
I don't think that terminology has come up. I think there's been some talk in the liturgical portion about lament and having expression. I know that was part of the spirituality that Father John Roush would work into some of these tours, but I haven't heard that specifically, and that's a great area for.
If anyone wants to take a look at the paper copy, I have a paper copy of your parish assessment and also a paper copy of listening session handout that the diocese has. I just happen to have a copy here for you to look
Very
at.
good. I wanted to say one thing about the grief. So because of our really kind of quick pace with this plan, the schools are going to, I've asked them to come up with an engagement plan. So this year, their first year plan. So I met with the high school this week, and they're planning by October 4th, they'll have a plan for us about how they're going to engage their students. So over this next year, they'll hopefully hear about this, but they need to have listening sessions with their students about what they feel. So we hope that this will be part of how they approach this, is by actually listening and hearing, and then they can address that. And thanks for bringing those handouts. Yep. In the mail.
Anyone wants to take a look at them?
As we conclude, unless you're concluding, I'd also like to call attention to another document from Pope Francis as a supplement to Laudato Si, Laudate Deum, that was released in 2023, that really makes the urgency much clearer. It's a shorter document, it's much to the point, there's no theological reflection, or not nearly as much in that document, but he does say some important things, and I'd like to quote a little bit from that. He says, once and for all, let us put an end to the irresponsible derision that would present this issue as something purely ecological, green, romantic, frequently subject to ridicule by economic interess. Let us finally admit that it is a human and social problem on any number of levels. For this reason, it calls for involvement on the part of all. In conferences on the climate, the actions of groups negatively portrayed as, quote, radicalized, tend to attract attention. But in reality, they're filling a space left empty by society as a whole, which ought to exercise a healthy pressure, since every family ought to realize that the future of their children is at stake. If there is sincere interest in making COP28 a historic event that honors and ennobles us as human beings, then one can only hope for binding forms of energy transition that meet three conditions: that they be efficient, obligatory, and readily monitored. This in order to achieve the beginning of a new process marked by three requirements, that is, that it be drastic, intense, and count on the commitment of all. That's not what has happened so far, and only a process of this sort can enable international politics to recover its credibility, since only in this concrete manner will it be possible to reduce significantly the carbon dioxide levels and to prevent even greater evils over time. I ask everyone to accompany this pilgrimage of reconciliation with the world that is our home, and to help make it more beautiful, because that commitment has to do with our personal dignity and highest values. At the same time, I cannot deny that it is necessary to be honest and recognize that the most effective solutions will not come from individual efforts alone, but above all from major political decisions on the national and international level.
If you have not read that document, like the Bishop said, it just reiterates everything and the urgency. Yes.
Okay. Oh, yeah. See, you'd think I'd know to use the microphone after this whole weekend, but two things. Dinner is being served whenever you're ready to go down. We'll come back here at 7 o'clock for the awards, And then we're going to have some fun either here or outside, wherever we want to do it. And if people want to go to a campfire, we can do that. We'll figure all that out when you come. Tomorrow morning, we have a little bit, we're going to go over the nominations, and then we will celebrate Mass together, which I'm excited about. And we've got some music, and that's all going to be good. We got readers, and so the readings will be up here for those who have volunteered to do that. And so we need another quote before we part. Be a patriot. Set a good example of what America means for generations to come. They will need it. Amen.